Okay, if we can now switch on our guests, if they are on. Maximo, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, and Dominique, are you on?
Yes, I am as well.
Perfect. Okay, so Maximo, I will open it up to you, and you're here to discuss the latest report on the impact of natural disasters and crises on agricultural and food security. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I will be brief, and we are here mostly to answer questions. But the report, the 2021 edition of the report, emphasizes several elements: losses in terms of nutrients, the impact of disasters in the forestry, fisheries, and agriculture subsectors, the impact of animal diseases, locust outbreaks, and climate change, and the use of technology like remote sensing technologies to gather information. Now, the major issues that came up of the report, first is the importance of the effects on agriculture of disasters. In the overall, we are talking of a 26% of damage is borne by the agricultural sector as a share of the total damage and loss in all sectors between 2008 and 2018. And if we just focus on the loss of agriculture relative to the share of total damage in agriculture, industry, tourism, and commerce is 63% in agriculture, which brings us the importance of looking into these numbers and the importance of having availability of data. Now, within the limitations of data available, we have been able to estimate using the lower than expected production elements that between 2008 and 2018, approximately $108.5 billion were lost as a result of declines in crop and livestock production in least developed countries and low middle income countries following disasters. This is equivalent to the value of agricultural production of Germany, Italy, and Ireland in 2018, and 2/3 of the value of the agricultural exports from South America in 2018. Converted in calories, the 108 billion corresponds to a total of 6.9 trillion kilocalories per year, which is the annual calorie intake of 7 million adult persons. And this is really important given the situation of undernourishment that we have today. Across all income groups, including the upper middle income countries and high income countries, the total loss is amount of $280 billion. If we decompose within the least developed countries and the middle income and the lower middle income countries, this $108 billion of loss is decomposed on 30 billion in Africa, Sub-Saharan and Northern Africa, 29 billion in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 49 billion in Asia, with Southeast Asia and Southern Asia surpassing all the other subregions. In Southeast Asia is $20.7 billion, and in Southern Asia is $25 billion. Now, when we try to understand which are the major type of shocks that create the major losses, we have found that drought turns out to be the most destructive force for agriculture. Drought causes an estimate of 37 billion losses in crop and livestock production in 2008 and between 2008 and 2018 period in the least developed countries and in the low middle income countries, or 34% of the total estimated loss in agriculture. Floods and storms are the next more relevant cause of loss in agriculture. And in Africa, crop and livestock loss saw peaks in 2011, 2012, 2015, and 2017, mostly driven by recurring drought episodes in the Sahel and the Horn regions, and by both drought and floods in the Southern Africa in 2015. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the loss peaks in 2012 and 2014, following the severe La Nina-related droughts. In Asia, loss in agriculture production saw a peak in 2015, which reflects massive disaster across the region, including Nepal earthquake, monsoon flooding in Myanmar, Bangladesh, India, and widespread flooding in Chennai, India. It might also be mentioned that the drought affected mostly agriculture, much more than other sectors. Out of the total impact of droughts, 82% affects agriculture, and only 18% affect other productive sectors based in the data that we have available. And finally, as mentioned, one of the most important things is how this will affect the calorie intake. So when looking at this data, it's important to consider that they do not constitute an indicative assessment. They do not provide evidence on nutrition and calorie deficit created by disasters. Rather, they reveal how disaster-related production losses may translate into significant and negative nutritional outcomes, and conversely, how disaster risk reduction may translate into positive nutritional contributions. The crop and livestock production loss in least developed countries and low middle income countries between 2008 and 2018, as I mentioned before, converts to a total of 6.9 trillion kilocalories per year, and this is equal to the annual intake of 7 million adult persons. In Africa, production loss due to disasters in 2008 to 18 amounts to 559 calories per capita per day, or 20% of the recommended daily allowance of calories referred to 2,500 calories per day. In Latin America and the Caribbean, during the same period, crop and livestock production loss corresponds to 975 calories per capita per day, or 40% of the recommended daily allowance of calories. This higher value is due to the fact that the region's loss was concentrated in higher calorie commodities such as milk and dairy, honey, oilseeds, and sugar crops. In Africa and Latin America, agricultural production loss converts to an annual average of 23 and 27 milligrams of iron per capita per day, respectively, and this is more than the 3 times the recommended annual iron intake for an adult male and just under 2 times that from an adult female. Similarly to their nutrients, loss corresponds to a very large portions of higher than 100% vis-a-vis the recommendations of daily intakes. And I will pass now to Dominique Burgeon, which will talk about emergencies and also about the locust problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Dominique, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you, Maximo, for setting the scene. As you said, Maximo, very clearly, at no other point in history have agri-food systems confronted such a heavy combination of old and new threats. You refer to drought, floodings, megafires, extreme weathers, desert locust worms, and even biological threats such as the COVID-19. So Maximo has presented the data, but I think it's very important to keep in mind that quantifying losses is not solely an assessment of the harm done by disasters. I think from our perspective, it is also critical to have these numbers and to work towards improving the quality of these data in the context of the monitoring of the Sendai frame of the indicators of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, as an evaluation of the disaster risk reduction and resilience strategies that are being put in place by the countries and their effectiveness. Basically, how much loss is acceptable in agriculture, when does crop and livestock losses translate into food insecurity, and then really to be able to guide investment and to the investments that are needed to reduce those dimension loss, and of course their impact on food insecurity at a time when the numbers of people in both chronic and acute food insecurity are increasing. So we have the data, we still need to work towards strengthening those data, but I think in parallel, I think what we have is the knowledge. We have the knowledge in terms of what needs to be done to improve risk governance, to make sure that risk governance is really embedded within the policies and strategies of governments, that we have the right early warning system, and above all that they basically implement disaster risk reduction strategies. And there, I think we have a wealth of really evidence showing the cost benefit of these disaster risk reduction strategies that need to be put in place. I mean, we have a body of evidence that shows that we can have at least 1 to 2 to 7, on average $3.7 of cost of benefit for every dollar invested in disaster risk reduction, but can go up to $7. So very significant. So we have the evidence that this needs to be done. We have, Maximo was talking of the desert locust. The desert locust, I mean, has been a very good example of what can be avoided if we act early and if we act at scale. I mean, now we are 1 year into this response. about 4 million tons of food have been avoided in terms of losses. We have enough basically to feed about 34 million people, not to mention the positive impact on pastoralists, etc. So we have the evidence. We need to work towards the right policies, and we have the knowledge on what needs to be done. Now we are at the decade for action to reach the SDG. I mean, obviously, with the 2.5 billion people across the world, 60% of them living in basically low-income developing countries being regularly hit by these disasters, unless we work towards building their resilience, unless we make the right investment at scale, it will be extremely difficult to really reach the SDGs in these countries. So this is really, this report on evidence is also a call for action, to act and to put into practice at scale what we know, and definitely go beyond the piloting. Thank you, Stéphane.
Thank you very much, Dominique. We'll go to questions. Edie Leder, Associated Press.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Thank you for doing this briefing. You've talked about a little bit about what can be done to mitigate these losses and try and diminish the effects of natural disasters and the locust invasion. But what are the obstacles? Is it a lack of money? Is it a lack of interest by government leaders? Is it something else that's really preventing the kind of investments that you're talking about?
I don't know if Maximo, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I will start, and Dominique, if you want. But basically, I think what is important is one of the elements that this report tries to bring is to quantify the level of the loss, which was missing before. So we now are able to quantify it, despite it's important that the data still has a lot of limitations. So one of the elements that we need to do to change, to increase resilience, is first to be having more predictive power to be able to understand when these problems are going to happen. And that requires big data, real-time data, and that's what we are aiming to. It also requires that we have in place the latest technologies through the One Health approach, for example, to minimize potential issues like the COVID-19 that we are facing, but also like the case of the locust. Now, you ask an important question of what is the limitation. For sure, resources are a limitation. For FAO, and Dominique can explain carefully, that was difficult to raise the resources needed to be able to react at the velocity and to be preventive at the earliest stage of what locust was creating. And the same happens to other. So I will combine both, the element of having the capability to have more predictive power, to avoid the problem when it's already there, and second, the resources and the institutionality to be able to react at the velocity. But I pass to Dominique, which can go in details.
Well, no, thank you, Maximo. I think you said it all. Indeed, I think what we really need to keep in mind, for example, talking of the locust, is really the need to keep a minimum degree of surveillance, to be able to keep data and to keep really the preparedness type of activities for surveillance and the capabilities to really intervene very early on when the first signal comes. I mean, and of course, what the situation we were confronted to in the Horn of Africa has been a situation where countries had not to deal with that sort of situation over the last 50 or even 70 years. So we had to rebuild very quickly a cadre of experts, while indeed minimum investment over the sort of longer run would be useful to have the right capacities in place. And I think this is really what has been at the core of our response, is really not only to basically respond now, but also to look at what can we do to potentially help those countries deal with what could be a new normal, a situation where we know that these disasters will be more and more frequent and more intense. Meaning, for example, because we are talking of desert locusts, but we know that, for example, when there are rains or that sort of extreme weather events, this creates conditions for the spread of some animal diseases. Therefore, the monitoring of these situations enable us to take early action to prevent the deterioration of the overall situation. So this is really what is needed. So technical expertise, and then, of course, investment at scale in DRR practice, which, as I was saying, proved to be very good value for money.
Thank you. Carla, please. Your microphone, Carla, please.
Can you identify the areas of the world that are most adversely affected by these various natural disasters?
I can briefly, so I think it will depend on the problem you're looking at and the disaster you're looking. Clearly, in the case of droughts, Sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel region has been affected tremendously. The same in the case of Central America, in the dry corridor has been extremely vulnerable to La Niña and El Niño. So those are the regions where disasters have been happening frequently, those type of disasters linked to droughts and to lack of rain or to cyclones and so on. But what is important is that it's not only where it happens, but it's also how prepared those regions and countries are to be able to cope or to be able to be prepared for those risks. And that's the difference, because if you look at the US, you have many disasters happening in the US, but they are able to cope and they have mechanisms and resources to be able to respond quickly and to minimize those potential effects and losses. While in other regions of the world, which are poorer and have less capabilities, less infrastructure and less preparedness, it's a lot more difficult for them to recover and to be prepared, and therefore the losses are bigger as a consequence of that. Dominique.
Of course, you rightly say, Maximo, it's a matter of underdevelopment in many of these contexts where you have actually often the poorest people who are the most exposed because they live on marginal land, they live in land that can be regularly flooded, and I think this is really the issue. In terms of damage, of course, when in the numbers that Maximo presented, when you look at the losses by region, Asia by far has been absorbing the biggest share, followed by Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. But I think what is also important to keep is perhaps also to have a people-centered approach and think at also these small islands in the Pacific, where basically you have relatively small population, but where disasters such as cyclone, etc., regularly hit and can have devastating impact on the livelihoods of the communities. So I think often, we look at the big numbers, but it's also important to look at these communities where, and all these, we are looking at these mega disasters, but there are also the silent, what we call the silent disasters that are very localized, that will not make the news, but that are basically devastating the life and livelihoods of people.
Thank you. Okay, Gloria, you had a question? Okay, I think that's it. Maximo and Dominique, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.